In the world before Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom, before Thor defended the worlds with his famous hammer Mjolnir, there was another god that we very seldom talk about. And this is a god whose strength came neither from a spear nor the sword. In fact, this wasn't a warrior god at all. His strength was justice, and his name was Forseti, or Forseti, which means the primary seat, more or less. And perhaps this is the god or deity the world needs today. Maybe the god that the world needs the most as of now. So, who was Forseti? He, among all of the gods in the Norse world, very few of them remains as mysterious as Forseti, actually. And he appears only briefly in the surviving sources. No great adventures, no legendary battles, and no famous mythical weapons like Mjolnir. And yet, those passages we have paint a picture of the maybe one of the most remarkable gods in the Norse pantheon. And according to Snorri Sturluson, who is the one who wrote these stories down once upon a time, Forseti was the son of Balder, the beloved god whose death marked the beginning of Ragnarök. And his mother was no other than Nanna, Balder's devoted wife. And I think it's hard to find more symbolic parents than that in the Norse pantheon, actually. From Balder, maybe the compassion came, which Balder was famously known for, among other things, of course. And from Nanna, I imagine the steadfastness came in his characteristics. And talking about Forseti, he was the personification of justice. And Forseti in the stories lived in Glitnir, which has a pretty similar name in today's Scandinavian, glittrig, which basically translates to shiny or sparkling. Glitnir is usually translated to the shining hall. And in the Poetic Edda, Glitnir is described as a hall with golden pillars and a roof of silver. So quite a place, actually. And there every dispute was settled. And it was not settled through intimidation and not through violence, not through holmgång, for example. It was brought through wisdom, basically. And in the poem Grimnismal, we can read that Glitnir is the ninth, there Forseti dwells, and settles every quarry. And that almost everything the poem at that particular place tells about him. Snorri, however, later expands upon this in the Prose Edda, and writing that everyone comes before Forseti leaves reconciled. And if we think about that phrase for a moment, it doesn't translate to everyone leaves victorious. They leave reconciled. That's a big difference. And neither does everyone leave with what they wanted, nor at peace necessarily. And that is not merely about judgment. That is reconciliation, I think is the right word. And interestingly enough, some scholars believe that Forseti and my Frisian brothers here might find this enjoyable, is actually connected to the old Frisian deity named Forseti, I think is the correct. My Frisian is not up to speed, sorry about that. Forseti or Forseti, worshipped around how the Heligoland in the North Sea. And so there might be a connection there. Linguistically, there's clearly a connection there, I would argue. Whether Forseti and Forseti are truly the same deity, of course, remains debated, because no one lives to tell the story. But they are connected in a sense that his roots may reach even deeper than the Icelandic sagas themselves. And perhaps that mystery in itself is quite fitting when talking about this particular god. The stories, like I started out with in this little video, never tells us how powerful Forseti was in battle. They never celebrate his military victories, which there's no shortage of in the Icelandic sagas, in other stories, of course. Instead, they preserve something that I find more difficult, at least in modern life. It's the image of a ruler whose authority did not come from fear, but from fairness. And not from force itself, but from wisdom. And he should not be misconstrued with Tyr, because Tyr is oftentimes depicted as the god of justice and sacrifice. But Forseti settles quarries and not balances the world in itself like Tyr does. So I like to connect the mythologies to the now. So why does Forseti matter today? Well, we oftentimes imagine modern civilization that suffers from a lack of knowledge. And I don't necessarily think that is true. We have more information than any civilization in history, actually. I have talked about this before here on Tyrdom. But what we lack today is judgment. And every day we're encouraged to react before we understand. You can take any social media platform you like, but I think X marks the spot in this particular example. We tend to condemn before we actually listen to things, and we choose sides prior to seek the truth as far as we can tell the truth. And social media algorithms tends to reward outrage before wisdom, I would argue. And politics in itself rewards division, and the algorithms rewards conflict. And yes, justice itself cannot exist where anger speaks first. That is by necessity. And a wise judge listens longer than he speaks. Think about that one. He seeks the truth rather than the victory. So there's very low ego in being a good judge. And he understands that fairness also requires a lot of patience. And perhaps this is why the Norse imagined justice living inside a shining hall. I think there's quite a lot of symbolism in this particular hall, because justice requires clarity. Not passion, not ego. It demands clarity. And in old Scandinavian societies, settled disputes in the thing. And these were public assemblies where free people gathered to hear evidence and negotiate settlements and pronounce judgment based on what the evidence that was presented. And although no surviving source explicitly calls Forseti the god of the thing, this character reflects the very idea that made out the thing. Law, dialogue, and honor, trust. And without those, society eventually collapsed into revenge. And a thing about the thing, by the way, up until this day, here in Scandinavia, we still say the ting when you're meeting a prosecutor and the judge, by the way. So it's a very, very old word, and it's still in use today. Pretty cool, I would say. So justice is not weakness, and justice requires immense strength in order to be effective. And it's very easy to hate things or people, and it's quite easy to seek revenge. And it's easy to think that your tribe will always come out on top. Quite human traits, if you ask me. But true justice demands something much harder. It demands some humility. And I think this tells his view on moral at that particular time. And I think when we're on the topic of actually learning from the mythology here, so how can we honor Forseti today? Perhaps not through ritual necessarily, but through character, which is also something I talk quite extensively about here on Tyrdom. But I think the first and probably most important one is to speak truthfully, because words can create reality. We can see this also being very, very important in Finnish mythology, where reality itself is sung into reality. Every lie weakens trust. Very important. And every honest word strengthens it. So this is once again the balance between the good and the bad, so to speak, the ginungen gap. But before speaking, ask yourself this: is it true? And is it fair? And lastly, is it necessary? Step number 2 that I think is quite important in your everyday life is that you keep your promises. And your word, especially as a man, should carry weight. There's a reason why there were honor bracelets back in the day. You swore on your honor bracelet that you if you gave a promise, you would keep your promise. And the strongest communities ever, it doesn't matter where you look in the world, they were not built on merely laws. They depended upon people whose promises meant something. And I can feel in this day and age, people become a bit complacent about this. And I think that if you become one of those people that keep your promises, it will show, right? And I think that actually listening before you judge people is very important, because I've talked about the hero's journey here a lot. It's a very, very old thing that has followed humanity as far as we can tell anyways. But every single person, more or less, think that they are the hero in their own journey. And even though that might hold some truth to it, and it's certainly not a bad goal to have, justice begins with actually understanding, and not by assuming things. You have to listen carefully. You have to ask questions to truly understand. Once you have that, you can make your judgment on things. And be fair even when fairness costs you. I think this one is a hard one. Anyone can be just when justice is convenient, you know. One's character is revealed when honesty demands a sacrifice. And I think that is the path of Forseti. This also holds true in the story of Tyr. He sacrificed his hand to the Fenris wolf in order to save humanity and hinder Ragnarök. So, and one thing that I also find quite important is to judge yourself before you judge others. And the easiest faults to see is someone else's. And the hardest to see is your own. And I have talked before about actually daring to stare into the abyss to see the dark sides of yourself. Carl Jung talks about this to a great extent about the shadows. And the greatest judge is not the one who condemns the world, actually. It's the one who holds himself accountable firstly. And yeah, another one that I have thought about quite a lot is that leave every conflict more peaceful than you found it. And I have to admit, I have had my fair share of online exchanges, for example. And I have reflected quite a lot about this, and notice that the old stories do not say, they never talk about this explicitly. They never tell us that Forseti destroys his enemies. They tell us that he resolves disputes. And imagine becoming that person that people seek when conflict arises, rather than being the person that people actively avoids, not to fuel the conflict, so to speak. Not because you're feared necessarily, but because you are trusted. There are few greater compliments than being that person, I would say. And like I said in the beginning, we know surprisingly little about Forseti, and perhaps that that is why he still speaks to us. Maybe not everyone has heard about Forseti, but his place in the world was to settle quarries, sorry about that, and being a judge, and making the judgment calls even though they were inconvenient sometimes. And the old texts, they oftentimes leave room for reflection rather than certainty in many aspects. Whether or not you believe in the Norse gods is ultimately your own choice. Whether you see them as actual beings, deities, or as archetypes of nature's powers. That's not the point. But I think we all can learn from the virtues presented by Forseti. They are truly timeless. And make sure to speak the truth. Keep your word and listen before judging, and choose fairness over revenge. And leave the world a little bit better than you found it. And perhaps that is what the story about Forseti actually meant. And if one day you happen to just stand in the shining hall of Glitnir, would you own your conscience or stand beside it? I think that's food for thought, actually. Could you be able to stand in front of Forseti and face your judgment? Yeah, we'll see. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this little venture into Forseti, one of the more unknown gods, but definitely not one that is unimportant. Okay, make sure to walk with honor and live as if your ancestors are watching. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a like and maybe even subscribe if you feel like it. And I'll talk to you another day. And as usual, Tyrdom out.